Welcome to Good Grief, the podcast where resilience meets reality. I'm your host, Dr. Christine Malone. In this podcast, we delve deep into the stories of individuals who've triumphed over tragedy, adversity, and trauma. In every episode, we bring you raw and honest narratives from guests who faced life's most challenging moments head on. Through candid conversations, they share their journeys of resilience, shedding light on the strategies, mindset shifts, and support systems that empowered them to rise above their darkest hours. Join us as we explore the profound depths of human resilience and discover how, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and yes, good grief. Okay, listeners, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. My guest is Jude Holland, and she's going to tell us her story of what she's been through, some trauma that she's been through, and then what she's doing about it now. So, Jude, if you would like, you could just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, thanks, Christine. I am a therapist. I've been a therapist and coach now for 25 years, and I've wrote a couple of books along the way as well, and I've taught therapy for a period of time and worked in various organisations as a therapist along the way. And from my experience, which will be 8 years ago now, but actually started 13 years ago when my mum died. From my experiences then kind of taken me more into the place of working as a female abuse recovery coach. So that's the area where I'm kind of doing most of my work at the moment.
Great. And it's important work for sure. Unfortunately, too happens. But so tell us a bit about your story. I know you mentioned about your mom passing away and so on. So kind of if you want to start with that and kind of tell us what happened and so on.
Yes, of course. At the time, so it's 13 years ago now, and at the time I was training as a social worker. I was in my second year of my training, and my mum at the time had basically a chest infection. Went in hospital with a chest infection, and within a week she died.
Oh my
so
goodness.
Quite dramatically, ultimately. There was no kind of leading up to that she'd been unwell. And actually what happened was there was then an issue with her lungs and you know, had diabetes for a long period of time. So quite quickly her organs then started to deteriorate. So within a week she died, which I'd always been really close to my mum. We'd always had a really good relationship. And when she died, probably a couple of days after that, my partner, who I was living with at the time, I also came home from university one day to find Facebook messages online where he was in contact with another woman. So within 2 days of my mum dying, I discovered that my partner was also in a relationship with someone else. So 2 days later, I then threw him out. So my whole world at that point was in turmoil. I didn't know what day it was really. I was functioning, I would say, but not very well. So at that point, I also decided, because I'd been a therapist at this point for a period of time, probably about 12 years at this point. And I decided at that point that I was going to stop my social work training because I wasn't in a place where I wanted to help other people. I felt really angry. I was in that grief process ultimately, and I needed that empathy for myself. So I stopped my social work course, and I wasn't working as a therapist at that point either. And actually I opened 2 dog grooming salons. I'm a trained teacher. I opened 2 dog grooming salons. I kind of backed away from working with people, if you like, and trained people to groom for the next, I don't know how many years.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like I'm a big dog person. I have 4 dogs, so I'm all about animals are very, very curative and helpful when we're grieving as well. That's been my experience. So at some point in time, you were able to kind of get back into doing your work because you're working as a therapist now. So how did you kind of make that transition?
I decided that I was going to train as a hypnotherapist. There was a specific image. I'd never seen anyone die before. And when my mum died, I didn't want to be in the room, and my dad asked me to come back in the room when she died. And I couldn't get rid of the image of my mum when she died. So I trained and went to do hypnotherapy training initially, which then helped me to get rid of that picture of my mum. And ultimately, that trauma was then stopping me from grieving. So by removing the picture, it then allowed me to grieve ultimately. But up to that point, there was lots of self-defeating behaviour going on. I was drinking too much to enable me, to emotionally regulate. I was on dating sites. And again, in that place of wanting that intimacy and that closeness with somebody, but at the same time being very vulnerable, and then, walking away from that as a sense of safety for me. So I trained as a hypnotherapist first, and then I started teaching for a very large company. And again, still in the work that I was doing, but kind of a step back from it. I wasn't working with clients. So it was a step back from therapy, if you like. And then from the teaching, I was then offered a full-time position working in the Priory, both as a group and an individual therapist. And I went to work for them at the Priory, and on the very first day of being there, I was in a group situation, and one client within the group was really defensive, didn't want to be there. She was angry because here I am again, and I was really open and honest in that group. And, you don't have to be here. Therapy is a choice. It's voluntary, which made her even more angry because, I was dismissing what she wanted to say. And I came out of that group and I thought, do you know what? At that point, I felt I've faced the worst thing in my life that I could possibly face. And I'm still stood here in the middle of this group. And I realised that group could have thrown anything at me and I would have been okay. So I felt like that was the changing point for me, of feeling like I felt like I had the confidence again as a therapist and in my life that I felt had been taken away when my mum died.
Yeah, that's kind of like you were helping other people was part of helping yourself. So that's kind of why I do this show. So that's great. Exactly. So then you did eventually end up in a relationship that wasn't a very positive one.
That's right. I was going on dating sites, as I said earlier, and part of that was about not wanting to be alone. There was a real sense of isolation and not wanting to be alone. At that point, I was also working as a therapist within a sexual assault unit. So went on the dating site. This was roughly about 12 months after my mum had died. Met this guy on the dating site. So at that point, I was in rented accommodation. I had 6 dogs. And now looking back, what I would see as maybe a yellow flag, within 6 months of us being together, he wanted us to move in together. So I gave up my rented accommodation. At that point, everything in the relationship was good. There was nothing to kind of tell me that anything was not okay. We moved in together, and within a 6 months period, he then lost his job. So for the next 5.5 years, I then worked 3 jobs to kind of keep us financially stable. So if I look back now, unintentionally, I'd already put myself in a very vulnerable position, isolated myself away from family and friends. The beginning of the relationship, I was already in a financially abusive place, isolated, but at that point, the relationship was good. Roll on another 5.5 years, which takes us to a very different place. And strangely now, when I look back, I was still working in the sexual assault unit then. I was having external supervision. No one around me had any idea of what was going on in the relationship. And gradually over a period of time, it became more abusive. So, from the arguments, so mentally, physically, emotionally abusive, that it was a gradual thing. And I think most people think that abuse is physical. And for me, I suppose too, because I was working with people that were vulnerable, and at work, there was one person, there was my professional self, if you like. There was very much this separateness of keeping me okay, that this was my professional self. And this was the part of myself that no one saw, ultimately. No one at work had any idea, which obviously came out a little bit later down the line. Okay. So there was emotional abuse. There was physical abuse towards the end of the relationship. He was going on dating sites. This was while I was working. He was bringing other women home that I wasn't aware of. And then one of the things towards the end of the relationship, my cousin contacted me and said, Jude, there's a picture of him on the website, on one of the dating websites. So very much in my face, this is what's going on.
He wasn't even trying to hide it. I mean,
here it is. So then I'm going to go to the Christmas of that year. So I actually left in the March. Okay, so I'm going to go to the Christmas of that year. The Christmas of that year, we'd gone out to a Christmas party. Up to this point, there'd been lots of arguing. There had been physical abuse up to this point. But of course, we had, the love bombing. I love you. This is never going to happen again. In connection to him being on dating sites and seeing other women, there was very much like, that's all in your mind. It's not real. All this gaslighting going on. So I was in a place of questioning myself. Is this true? Is it not true? He was allowing me access to his Facebook and his phone and sharing his passwords. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, he's being honest here. He's being real with me. But no, he had a second phone.
Oh.
So, which again was something that I discovered later on down the line. So, and whenever there was an argument, it was always my fault. I was the one that was always to blame. And though he was never diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, because he would never have accessed support or acknowledged that there was an issue, he never said sorry in our relationship. It was always my fault. I was always to blame. He had this grandiose attitude about him. Everyone loved him, thought he was wonderful, so kind of ticked all those boxes to some degree. But obviously was never diagnosed, so I can't say. But I can say now that I would say that he had some of the traits. That's what I would say. So bring us to the Christmas of that year, and we'd been out to a party with his family, and I'd had quite a lot to drink that evening. Was unaware at this point. So probably 2 weeks up to that point, I'd been really angry and felt like my mood was out of control, but didn't really understand why that was the case. So we'd gone out to the Christmas party. I'd had quite a lot to drink. We was arguing over, coming back, we was arguing over the messages that he'd received at Christmas and New Year's Eve over Facebook, through his phone, going to the toilet, checking his messages, hiding things ultimately. And so the two critical points for me now when I look back was, one, when we were arguing, we was at the top of the stairs and he was strangling me at the top of the stairs. Right. And I remember standing at the top of the stairs thinking, I'm going to die. I'm going to go down the stairs and that's it. I'm going to die. And what I also didn't realise at that point at the Christmas was that I was also pregnant. So those were the two critical points for me that said, I need to leave. One, that the relationship had become quite physical, and 2, that I discovered that I was pregnant at that point. And just around that time at Christmas, I just really feel like, I didn't have clarity of thought. I didn't have any kind of, in connection to my decision making, it felt that my thought process was just not there.
Mm-hmm.
He had very much destroyed my self-esteem throughout that relationship, which for most people in abusive relationships, that's part of the process. And his explosive temper had become more so. So I was, up to Christmas of that year, I was working 7 days a week because I didn't want to go home. And for me, that horrible feeling of, walking on eggshells, what's going to happen when I walk through the door? Is the argument's going to start as soon as I get in? Just not wanting to go home.
Right. Why? I'm curious if he's out looking at, or with other women. Why did he stay around? Was it because you were supporting him, or was he? I'm just why? What was his incentive to want to keep going on like that?
From my perspective, I see it very much that I was supporting him from a financial perspective, and he was stuck in that situation.
Okay.
He wasn't working, and in that 6-year period, though he kind of said that he was looking for jobs and that he never worked within that 6-year period. So ultimately, I was making it easier for him, so he could kind of do what he wanted, and everything would still be okay for him.
That was my guess. I mean, and I mentioned I was in a narcissistic relationship with my ex-husband, and he didn't work for many, 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 many years, and it was always like I think, like, why do you stay? And it's because, well, you got it good here. That's why you stay. So, that's kind of, yeah, I completely get that. So did you decide at that point that you were leaving once you got the whole upstairs and you're pregnant and all this, you decided you were going to leave?
Yes, I decided at that point that I was going to leave. I suppose, when we think about the fact that he didn't work for those 6 years, this seems strange to me now in some ways, but I felt responsible. And I think that was also part of my makeup that made it difficult to leave, that he was in it, my empathy, if you like, that he was in a difficult situation. And though I was in an horrendous situation, it made it even more difficult for me to leave. So when we got to the Christmas, and that, the physical abuse was more, and I found out that I was pregnant, for me, that was the point. I need to leave. And, I was also aware that when you leave, that's the most dangerous time for a woman as well. So for a period of time up to Christmas, I'd been putting some money away. So I'd been saving money. I had set up another bank account. I had got a personal credit card. I'd kind of put things in place where I had more independence, ready to leave ultimately. So, and from his perspective, because I knew that it was the most unsafe time for me, I let him believe that we were leaving together. So from his perspective, we were moving together in the March period. So he came to view houses with me, believing that we were leaving together. Obviously, that wasn't the case. And I, towards the end of the relationship, I reached out to a few people around me. So I made people aware around me towards the end. So from the December to the March, I reached out to my sister, and I told my sister what was happening. I reached out to my dad's next door neighbour, who actually came and helped me to leave, because, like I said earlier, I had 6 dogs as well. And I want to say, people ask this question of, why did you stay? Why didn't you leave? And for me, those 6 dogs were one of the difficulties for me, because I couldn't rent somewhere with 6 dogs. It made it difficult at that point. So I needed to be in a place to be able to buy something to be able to leave, ultimately, to take them with me.
Right.
So I spoke to my dad's next door neighbour. I spoke to my sister. I And the next door neighbour came and actually helped me to move. And when I left, I had a washing machine and a bag of clothes and 6 dogs. And that's what I left with after 6 years, you know. And I particularly found a removal guy who was used to going into domestic violence situations. So he knew what he was coming into, and that made me feel more secure in leaving in case anything did happen. And of course, everyone kind of thinks that once you leave, everything's okay. You know, everything's okay now, you've left. When in reality, that isn't the case. For me, or for lots of people that do kind of leave that situation, you know. So I left. I really rebuilt my life. But like I said, it's not as simple as when you leave, you know, you just leave. That, yes, there was that ultimate relief that I've left this situation. But then, you know, still that sense of not feeling safe, that still that judgment and those negative thoughts, and not having clarity of thought, not having, you know, feeling like I have a lack of direction, not having informed decisions, not being assertive, because I've been in a position for the last 6 years of, well, if I say no, then that's going to erupt into some kind of argument. So rebuilding myself after leaving, and I think that's the part that most people think, well, you've left, so now everything's okay. Yeah. So for me, it was getting to a place where I felt safe in my home, getting to a place where I could leave my home and not worry about seeing him in the street, you know, not having flashbacks, not having nightmares. So things that people don't necessarily think about once you leave.
So did he know where you'd gone to? Was he able to find you, or did you go someplace where he wouldn't know where you were?
He didn't know where I'd gone to. He would probably have had a rough idea of the area, but not the house itself, because I stayed within close distance of where my family home was. So he probably had a rough idea of where I was, but not specifically where I was.
Right. And did he know you were pregnant?
He didn't know that I was pregnant, no.
Oh, he didn't. Okay.
No.
And then I know you eventually decided not to continue with the pregnancy. So how did you get to that decision? How did you get to the point where you thought this isn't going to be a good idea?
Yeah. First of all, I suppose what I want to say, Christine, is it was one of the most difficult decisions that I had to make. Going back though to that time, I can say that now with clarity. At that point, I didn't have clarity. I don't think my decisions were clear. And I want to say I haven't got children. I've got fur babies. I've got stepchildren now. Okay. But I always wanted a child. I feel quite emotional saying that. And it was one of the most difficult decisions for me to make. But I also knew that if I had this child, this man in some way, shape or form would always be in my life. And I wouldn't have any choice over that. And I wouldn't have any choice over the relationship that he would have with that child and the effect that he could have on that child. So it wasn't just about me. It was about the effect that that could have on that child as well.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's kind of hoping, you know, trying to be healthy yourself, right? And keep away from this person, but to also realize what that would be like for the child to have to deal with this person and you being connected to them. Yeah, I can only imagine. And when you say hardest decision, I completely respect that, because I certainly know that would not be an easy decision for anyone. So I know you went on to write books. So let's move into talking about your books. So I know that one of them that I'm going to look up when we're done talking, because I myself have been in a narcissistic relationship, would like to hear about, was your book about narcissistic relationships. So how did that come to be, and what kind of things are in it?
Okay. Ultimately, it's just a 10-point plan. So these are the things that you would look for within a narcissistic relationship. And it is a brief guide. So if you recognize some of these things, this could mean that this person is narcissistic. Does this person have empathy for you in this relationship? No. Okay, that might be. Does this person say that they're sorry in your relationship? Oh, never. Okay, that could be. So that's part of where it came from. And my abuser was not diagnosed as having narcissistic personality disorder. But would I say that he had the traits in connection to narcissistic personality disorder? 100%. Mm-hmm. And that's where the book came from. And I also want to say, Christine, that book is there on Amazon, and that book is free, and it's going to stay free. Okay, awesome. Because I want that to help people moving forward in connection to being able to recognize things in relationship.
So it's about recognizing if I'm in that relationship. Is there anything in there about how to get out?
There is a little bit in there about how to get out. There's a little bit in there of how you can help yourself while you're in that relationship as well. The second book that I've wrote tells you a little bit more about how to get out and what support is available to you.
Right. So let's start that one. I know you wrote about more of your own personal story in there. So what is that one called, and what's in that one?
Okay, so that's Domestic Violence, a Therapist Stroke Survivor's Guide. So that kind of tells you about my story, okay, similar to what we spoke about today. It gives you a picture of what my life looks like today as well. So I give you a before and after, okay? And the important thing that I talk about in the book is that you can't go through this journey on your own. You need support. You need someone to support you through it, whether that be a therapist, whether that be a mentor, whether that be a coach. You need that support to gain that clarity and your self-esteem, and that compassionate voice for you that has been lost. In the book, it talks about what is available to you as a therapist. So if your client goes through the court process, what that might look like, what support they can be given, and, practical support around leaving, things to do, etc.
Right. That's great. And you work now mainly with women who are coming out of domestic violence relationships. Is that what you're doing?
That's right. So I work as a female abuse coach now, predominantly with professionals. One of the things that I found difficult, because I was working in a sexual abuse centre at the time, was, I've been a professional therapist now for a long time. How do I tell the people around me, as a professional, working with people in an abusive relationships, that I am in an abusive relationship? How do I say that? How do I open that up? And it was really hard for me to do that. And it took me a period of time to write the books, to actually disclose that this is what's happened to me. And when I spoke to fellow professionals that I was working with at the time and told them that this was going to be coming out, I had very mixed opinions of that. I had closer professionals that cried and said that they had no idea that that was my experience, and that didn't show in my working life. Well, no, thank you for supervision and, the honesty and relationship there. And then, it was difficult. I had other professionals that kind of said that they're not sure that they would have had the courage to kind of speak out and be honest about their experience, and I'm worried again around how people may judge them in that experience.
Yeah. My guess would be, I'm going to be pretty positive about this, that your people you work with, though, if they know that is part of your background, it gives you that much more validity, that what it's like. You've been in my shoes, which I have not been in a physically abusive relationship, but I was in one with a narcissist where I wouldn't want to talk about it, because I think I'm a strong woman. I don't want people to know that I'm being, manipulated by someone, because that's embarrassing, and I don't want to admit that, even though I hadn't done anything wrong. So that part of it is kind of, but then when I talk to people who have been in such a similar situation, it's almost like you get that Okay, you've been in this train, you know what it's like, rather than you're sitting back there.
Mhm.
Maybe you read a book about it, but if you haven't been there, it's hard to really, really grasp that. So I'm guessing that's probably part of what happens in your professional life.
Because we're talking about that shame and blame
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we are definitely going to be putting links to your books in the podcast notes for this podcast. And I know you have a website as well, but we'll put all that in so that listeners can find your materials and such, and learn more
Can
about
I
it.
just share with you, Christine, where I am now?
Yes, please.
Okay, so going back and looking at the experience that we spoke about today, in the book, it then says, now, kind of 6 years on, I've been married 4 years. I now have 3 properties, 2 stepchildren and 6 fur babies, So with that support, you can develop and, be whatever you want to be. And I truly believe that everyone can do that.
And move
And
into
that's the reason
a
why I do the work I do.
yeah, and move into a healthy relationship. I think a lot of people think
Exactly.
I'm never going to have a healthy relationship, when in reality, yes, you can.
Recognizing those patterns that may have repeated in other relationships, so then it's then not taken through into new relationships.
Right. Perfect. I mean, kind of like that whole thing about you got to work on yourself first before you can find someone else. So yeah, that
Exactly.
makes perfect sense. Otherwise you get right back into, maybe not noticing the signs and back into it. And all of a sudden, wow, I'm with someone very similar to the last person I was with, which is not healthy. So, well, Jude, is there anything else you'd like to share before we end our podcast today?
No, thank you so much,
Yes, thank you for
Christine.
being my guest. Your story is very moving and definitely speaks to the fact that you can, become better, become healthier, become a better person, learning from what you've been through, which I think is a very important message.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I hear one of your fur babies barking in the background. So little cutie. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Good Grief. We hope that stories shared today have inspired and empowered you on your own journey of resilience. If you want to dive deeper into the themes of trauma, tragedy, and survival, be sure to check out my memoir, The Day I Became the Spider Killer, a memoir of trauma, tragedy, and survival. In this book, I shared my own raw and honest experiences, offering insights and strategies for overcoming life's toughest challenges. You can purchase the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or listen to it on Audible. Your support helps us continue to bring these powerful stories to light and spread a message of hope and resilience. Stay tuned for more incredible stories on our next episode. Until then, remember, even in the face of life's toughest trials, there can be light, growth, and good grief.